Free speech. Presently, it enjoys quite popularity in a country like the Netherlands. So it might be a good idea to take a closer look and see what it really is about. Is it true that we long for freeing all unfree speech for the sake of free speech? Do we really love free speech that much? Why do we love that thing so much, so dearly? Free speech is, of course, a thing guaranteed by freedom of speech, or as we prefer to call it in the Netherlands, freedom of expression. Because, as you know, we are a nation that loves expression more than speech, and indeed we love expressing opinions, or indeed anything more than providing them with solid proof. It is as the Danish religious freethinker Søren Kierkegaard quipped, people demand freedom of speech instead of just freedom of thought, because otherwise they would be forced to think. Especially since 2 murders shocked Dutch society 10 years ago, freedom of speech is on everybody's lips again. The first murder, as you remember, was on politician Pim Fortuyn. The second, in 2004, 10 years ago, was on filmmaker Theo van Gogh. Especially since then, free speech and freedom of speech became widely popular slogans. And they came to stand for very important things. For many, they represent things like Western values or even Western civilization as such. The problem, of course, is that it is in itself a rather abstract concept. Free speech or freedom of speech in itself has no natural or positive content. There is no way to force you to think that one thing is more free than another, except for more or less arbitrary reasons. In the end, of course, it's all dependent on the right political conditions. The decision what is free and what is unfree is in the end a question of power, a question of politics. Of course, that's not the way we like to see it. We would love to see free speech and freedom of speech as something far more beautiful, something more important, something more positive. And it is for many, whereas, of course, in reality, it's just the mere absence of constraint thing, but that doesn't mean too much for us. So we were looking for meanings. And one good answer, one serious pretender for that is a long-established, centuries-old tradition called free thinking, free thought. That's a great idea, and it is indeed an impressive tradition. Notorious and well-known free thinkers, say from Voltaire to John Stuart Mill, were well aware of the meaning of freedom of expression and are quoted till the present day for that sake, free speech and freedom of expression, especially in their opposition against established powers, especially established religion and the established church. Well, that actually is a great idea, and it is quite inspiring, and we, for good reason, still read them, because it looks like a good idea to express free thought by the means of free speech, and they look like natural allies. Of course, again, there's a small problem. There is no natural content to free thought, just as there is no natural content in free speech. Nobody can force you to consider one strand of thought more free than another. In the end, again, it is arbitrary or dependent on the right conditions, again. The solution has always been to consider free thinking, free thought, the strand that fought against established powers, established religion especially in countries where the church was part and parcel of established powers of the state. Free thinking was the natural opponent, and that is indeed a good idea. And a great example is, of course, Voltaire. But again, Voltaire was in the end a Catholic believer. So again, you might be a free thinker and yet be some sort of religious person yourself. The problem then is that something happened with the happy tradition of free thinking since then. In its opposition to established religion and the church, it became itself attached to great schools of thought that it considered its natural opponents, schools like positivism or scientism or sometimes even atheism. And that's, of course, a good idea, but Again, let's not forget what Frank Zappa learned. Frank Zappa says, a mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it isn't open. In the end, referring to a closed system might also close your mind. One might even argue that in the present situation, in secular societies as ours, the Pope presents a daring freethinker. In the end, he questions well-established ideas and dogma. So let's perhaps take not too serious the strong rhetoric in a society like ours that argues that religion, especially Islam, is in itself against freedom of speech. Two well-known Dutch politicians 10 years ago indeed argued for a liberal jihad. They promoted a liberal holy war, and they wanted even to curtail or abolish civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of religion for the sake of, for the sake of what? For the sake of freedom. Well, that's big fun, of course, because in the end, you cannot defend freedom by abolishing it. If you really stand for free speech and for freedom of speech, it applies to exactly those thoughts, those ideas that you dislike or despise. Never forget, everybody loves free speech. Hitler and Stalin adored it. Only in case, of course, for the views that they liked only. It all originated from a long toleration debate in Europe. Toleration is not a nice thing, it's a necessity. It is the charge of waging war. This debate is not in wars, but in words. So it's not a nice thing, it's a necessity. It's almost similar like to freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is first and for all in this world universally needed for atheists, defending them against religious majorities that almost are everywhere. The same applies to free speech and freedom of speech. The only thing required is what Immanuel Kant taught us, sapere aude, dare to think freely for yourself, do as the Pope does, I would say, and please stop worrying and enjoy your life.